Okay, so in this video we're going to go through another example of a histogram, creating a histogram. Um, and you'll recall that a histogram is really just a graph that's used with interval and ratio level data. It can be used with ordinal data, but most often it's used with interval and ratio level data. And the idea is that we're just going to take a histogram, or take a frequency distribution, um, let's say for some variable z, and let me go ahead and change colors here, and we'll do this in green. Take a frequency distribution for some variable called z, and let's say z takes on the values from 10 to 11, 12, 13, and 14. And we'll give it a frequency distribution that looks like this. We'll say that there are 5 values of 10, 4 values of 11, 2 values of 12, 2 values of 13, and 4 values of 14. And so then we can count up the frequencies, add up, sum this column of frequencies to get our sample size. So 5 plus 4 is 9, plus 2 is 11, plus 2 is 13, plus 4 is 17. So we have 17 observations in our data for variable z. Now what we want to do is we want to turn this table of information into a graph that we can show the same information on and get a better idea of what's going on with our data. And so we'll create a graph here. Again, this on the y-axis we'll have our frequencies, and we'll see that our frequencies go as high as 5. The smallest value is 2, but they go as high as 5. We'll still go ahead and start with 0 down at the bottom, and we'll say 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Here's our values. And then on the x-axis here, we're going to have our values for the variable z, and we'll see that those values go from 10 to 14. So we'll go ahead and start with 10 on the left, 11, 12, 13, and 14. We'll go ahead and put some hash marks on here so we know where these are supposed to be. And now we've constructed the axes for our graphs, or for our histogram, and so we just need to fill in the bars. And if you saw our previous example, then to create the histogram, we just draw a vertical bar at each value of z, where the height of the bar represents its frequency in the data. So at the value of 10, the frequency is 5. So we will start by drawing a vertical bar that goes up to 5. At 11, the frequency is 4, so we'll have a bar that goes up to number 4, up to a frequency of 4 for the z value of 11. And then the value of 12 had a frequency of 2, so we'll draw a bar that goes up to 2. At the z value of 13, the frequency was also 2, so we'll have another bar the same height there. And then at 14, we'll draw a bar that goes up to 4, because that was the frequency at 14. Okay, so here's our frequency distribution now, our histogram drawn for the frequency distribution of z. And again, we can see fairly quickly that the highest value, the most common value of variable z is 10. That's the most common. And the least common occurs here at both 12 and 13, where the frequency is 2. Okay, so we get 5 is the most common, 2 is the least common. And we can see where the others are in between. And as we mentioned in the last video on histograms, you'll notice that I didn't draw any gaps in between these bars. And that's a convention for drawing histograms, that there are no gaps between the bars, because the idea is that if you've got interval or ratio level data, this is usually some sort of continuous distribution where we could actually have values in between 10 or in between 11 and 12, between 12 and 13. And so we push the bars together to keep in mind and remind ourselves that this is a continuous distribution in here. If you've got a bar graph like this, or if you've got something that has gaps between the bars, that would indicate that there's a discrete distribution and that those are distinct values and that there's no underlying continuous value. So just keep that in mind. There are some analysts who will say that for this to be a histogram, the bars have to be pushed together. But the information will generally still be the same, even if there are gaps between the bars. So this is an example, another example of turning a frequency distribution of data into a histogram.